So I think by now this track should be ready to be played in a club, and there are a few ways to finalize the master of this demo. I mean, it's still a demo, you know, so it's not the final master, and it's not the biggest deal if it's loud enough, if all the frequencies are in the perfect place. We have, of course, done some mixing to this, but you know, if I would really ready this track for release, I would go in some more detail. I would export all the parts and do a new mix within Ableton, and then I would put something on the master, like a small mastering chain. Kind of see whatever works, because every track's different. Every mix responds different to an EQ or a compressor or a limiter, and it really depends on so many different elements and parts of the mix. Because the track, I think, sounds pretty open, there's a lot of things happening, but it seems to all work quite well together. The only thing I would actually do is make sure that there is no distortion happening in the final mix. I would check if the loudness is not too high. There's different ways to measure loudness. For a project like this, I would like to use a metering system loudness unit full scale, which should kind of end up between around like -8. You can go to -6, but your sound is going to be like a sausage. It's not going to sound very pleasing to the ears because all your dynamics will be completely lost. -8 is a very safe point. I think usually what you would listen to on Spotify, for instance, would be more like -14. So even if you would give your mix to Spotify mastered very loud, they're going to take it down anyway. So you might as well keep as much dynamic range for a Spotify release. But for a club situation, you need a bit more volume. So then I would really like to stick to the -8, 8.5. A very good metering system is this Ulean loudness meter. It's a free download, and it shows in very good detail what the levels are that you're mixing at. My preferred go-to limiter is the FabFilter Pro L2, and it has a very nice and good LUFS metering system inside as well. It's a bit more detailed than the Ableton limiter, which in itself works perfectly well for this case, but I'm going to dive a little bit deeper and use my favorite Pro L. So by the looks of it, it is kind of hitting peaks at around -9. As you can see, I have a utility instance set up here, which is taking down the gain level to -6. I like to do this so I can really see within like one instance how loud my mix is going to be. Of course, you can use the volume fader within the limiter as well, but I like to just keep that at 0. So in case I put on a different limiter, because I like to have a different sound, I don't have to change that within every different plugin. And it's the most transparent way of mixing. So let's see what happens when I bump the volume up a little bit. As you can see in the limiter, it's taking off the peaks, which is okay. It's fine. There's plenty of dynamic range left still, and it is hitting somewhere around -8. Really depends on what part of the track we're in, and I think for now that's perfectly fine. I might take off some of the glue compressor because it's taking off some of the dynamic range already, and if you do too much compression with the limiter and the compressor itself, you just might end up with a very dull mix. This is kind of the mastering stage, and it's nice to be able to do that with having full control over your mix. For instance, I would maybe bump up the bass drum a little bit, like let's say 1 dB, because it will punch through the mix a bit more. Sometimes when you add the limiter and you have a very busy mix, it might become a bit too cluttered. And then there's different ways of approaching this. You can easily just like bring in the parts that really have the energy. In this case, the kick drum and maybe some of the hi-hats to give that groove a good presence. But yeah, I think the kick can definitely have one or two extra dBs, especially to give the real presence inside a club when you're playing it. Another thing we can add here is some equalization, and one of my very favorite plugins for this would be the Elysia Muse EQ. It has a very nice and warm, but also very edgy sound to it. The great thing about this plugin, which is made in Germany, is that it does mid-side equalization. So you can use a different EQ setting on the mid spectrum and the middle section. For club use, this is not very useful, to be honest. I have to mention that, because in a club situation, sometimes it's better if you have things a bit more mono. But if you're making a mix that is going to be meant for Spotify or home listening, you can really craft the mix very nicely and work within the stereo spectrum very, very well. Usually what I would do is bring in some high frequencies. So I've set it up in mid-sides, so then I have to use both sides of the plugin to make sure that both the mid-side, the mid-spectrum and the side spectrum are being changed. One thing that's very important for club music, dance music, techno, whatever you want to call it, is dynamic range. And you have to really make sure that you maintain a solid, nice dynamic range, which means don't add a big compressor at the end, because you're not going to have a very pleasant sound in a club. I think nowadays club systems are really good, really precise, so you will hear everything. And if you have a very busy mix and you add a big compressor, with the result of having no dynamic range, you just have one big wall of sounds in a club situation, and you want to be able to feel the bass line and feel the kick, hear the hi-hats on top, and not have too much happening in the mid-range. Of course, everything needs to have its place, but there's no need to push it all together. So dynamic range is absolutely essential. Don't use too many widening plugins on all of your parts. Don't make the mix too busy. If you crunch one thing up, you need to do the next thing as well. Before you know, you're just crunching up everything like a couple of dBs and you're just ruining your mix. So sometimes less is more in this case. So before I make the exports to a stereo wave file, I'm just going to check if the metering is still okay, because I did add a couple of small changes. Actually, in this the Pro L limiter, there's a few different ways of limiting different styles. You can hear the difference, but if you're not limiting too hard, the differences are quite negligible. Actually, that's not such a big deal. They all might work. It's only that when you start really pushing the levels that you are going to really hear a difference. In this case, I would kind of stick to transparent or maybe punchy. And I think the levels are still around the -8. It's going a little bit towards the -7 sometimes, but that's okay. We're going to just play this in a club, so these are the perfect settings. To export, I always take a little bit more than the last bit of the track. in this case, you know, the arrangement is not completely finalized, and that will definitely need some more edits later on. But at 4:30, I think we have a nice club edit. We can totally play this. And next thing is you just export. You can either use WAV or AIF, doesn't really matter. AIF is a Mac format, WAV is more all-round. I usually set it to 24 bits. Dithering is not really an issue. And then we make the big export. There we go. Track's finished, and I'm ready to play it in a club near you.